We are just starting, sir. Good evening to all. Respected senior faculty, Dr. Suresh sir, Dr. Jyoti, Dr. Sanish, Dr. Rinshi, Dr. Abdul Wahab, our secretary, dear delegates. Today is World Pre-Eclampsia Day. And the importance of the diagnosis, the screening and prevention of preeclampsia is very important in the current period of time, because like in any other disease, the prevention is always better than cure, than treating. Here, the importance is twofold, because we are preventing the morbidities and other bad outcomes in the mother as well as the fetus. So that is the most important aspect of this Act Early and Screen Early slogan of this year's Pre-Eclampsia Day. Today, we have an eminent panel of faculty to discuss on various aspects of preeclampsia, screening and prevention, and various diagnostic modalities. And we have Professor Suresh, is the pioneer of fetal medicine in India and abroad. And actually, we can call him as father of fetal medicine in our country. And we are very fortunate to have him on this very important day, in spite of his busy schedule. On this day, he has so many programs to attend, but he has immediately agreed to talk to our society members and to the entire gathering. And we are really thankful to you, sir. And we have Dr. Sanish, is the fetal medicine consultant at Perindalmana. He's also there to talk to us on one of the most important aspects of the this preeclampsia education program. And we have Dr. Jyoti Mancheri from Calicut and Dr. Rinshi from Kochi. And I'm just sharing the CV slides. To chair the session, we have Dr. Rinshi Abid, and she is MSDGO DNB Fellowship in Maternal Fetal Medicine, and the currently Assistant Professor of Amrita Institute of Medical Science, Kochi. And she has various training programs with regard to fetal medicine and in the fetal interventions, and a lot of publications to credit. And of this, one of the most important, which I can read, is the preeclampsia screening in the first trimester, preemptive action to prevent the peril. So that is a very important topic. With this, a few words, I invite Dr. Rinshi to chair the session. And before that, I invite Dr. Sanish to introduce today's academic program, the flow of events for the benefit of the delegates. Over to Dr. Sanish, please.
Good evening, everyone. I hope I can be heard nicely. So preeclampsia is a dreaded complication which needs no mention. However, the traditional approach, just like in, say, postpartum hemorrhage or other complications that happen in third trimester, has been secondary prevention. That is early diagnosis and the management for the same. Now, anyone who has done residency in obstetrics and gynecology knows a harsh experience in managing preeclampsia and eclampsia in the labor emergency rooms. Now, it's high time that we change the gear, and based on the backdrop of the success that we have accumulated in preventing major complications and the occurrence of live births of babies with Down syndrome, it's high time that we start screening and preventing preeclampsia in the first trimester using the judicious use of various modalities that we have, like uterine artery Doppler, biochemical markers, and aspirin. Now, this is not just a webinar. This is actually an educative program on preeclampsia screening and prevention. And the starting batsman is no other than Professor Suresh, who Dr. Rinshi will introduce. He'll be speaking on acting early, how to effectively screen preeclampsia in the first trimester using uterine artery Doppler and other modalities. This will be followed by my lecture on once a woman is categorized as high risk, how to prevent the occurrence of preeclampsia in them using aspirin and other agents. After that comes the most lively session that will be chaired and coordinated by Dr. Jyoti, renowned maternal fetal medicine specialist from North Kerala, with vast experience from both India and Australia in managing various maternal fetal medicine scenarios. In this session, we will be we'll be taking up questions from all the audience. A lot of questions have already come, and we will be presenting our own experience and the evidence-based management in managing all these situations. So over to Dr. Inji for introducing Professor Suresh.
Hello and a very good evening, everyone. It's indeed a privilege for me to be introducing the greatest man in fetal medicine in India. Sir has been in this field of fetal medicine for over 40 years, and he has trained more than 5,000 doctors all around the world. And as Kunjan Mohiuddin sir just said, he is the father of fetal medicine in India, and also perhaps the last word on any topic in fetal medicine. We warmly welcome you, sir.
Sir, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Sir, it's not audible, sir. Sir, you are not audible, sir.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and my sincere thanks to we call it as POGS, Perintalavanna of Subsequent Gynec Society, for inviting me here today, for giving you some insights on screening for preeclampsia in the first trimester. And those kind words of introduction, I think it's because when good friends are asked to introduce somebody, they always give you some high praises. But the thing is, you have stalwarts like Siris and Rinchi already there who are doing enormous amount of work. So anyway, it's good to be sharing some information. We know that preeclampsia is a significant problem for which screening has been going on for several years now. And it all started with second trimester screening, especially uterine artery Doppler screening in the second trimester, which they felt was okay, but reasonably good, but not good enough. And it was too late to predict in the second trimester because no interventions were available which could significantly modify the disease. We all know that the only cure for preeclampsia is delivery. And the question of pushing the patient, achieving enough gestational age to ensure both mother and baby are safe is the challenge. So in the search for some form of modification of the disease or treatment for the disease came the issue of having aspirin as the treatment. And of course, it was shown that aspirin and drugs given earlier was not going to be as effective. So having said that, you diagnose or you screen in the second trimester, but the drug is effective in the first trimester. So there's a real conflict here. So hence the challenge to push the screening earlier into the first trimester was undertaken. But everyone knows that screening for preeclampsia in the first trimester with uterine artery Doppler is not as sensitive as it is in the second trimester. But nevertheless, the fact that you need to do it in the first trimester, the compelling challenge explores several other markers that could be used. And now it has become an established fact that screening for preeclampsia being in the first trimester. So screening for Down syndrome is well known, but screening for preeclampsia has not taken off as much as screening for Down syndrome has, considering the fact that Down syndrome has an incidence of 1 in 800 to 1 in 2,000, 1,200, and the incidence of preeclampsia preeclampsia is 5 to 8 per 100. I mean, preeclampsia is far more prevalent in the population as compared to Down syndrome, but still all our focus is on Down syndrome and not on preeclampsia. And this is what is very surprising. So the question of, is preeclampsia screening needed? What are the components of preeclampsia screening? Risk factor based screening, multimodality screening, and also whether we can do screening in multiple gestation, and then what next steps of screening is what we will quickly look at. If you look at the impact of preeclampsia, it's about incidence is 5 to 8% of all births. 10 million women develop preeclampsia every year. 76,000 women and 500,000 babies die every year due to preeclampsia. And in developing nations, it's 7 times a woman is more likely to develop preeclampsia. So there is no question that we should be focusing on this topic very, very highly. And if you also look at the confidential inquiries into maternal deaths in Kerala from 2004 to 2000, hypertension is the second highest cause. And again, a reason why we should be focusing on this. Now let's go a little bit into the basics, and we know that the placental cytotrophoblasts invade the uterine wall, where they breach the veins and extensively remodel the maternal spiral arterioles. The essence of arterial supply from the uterine arteries to the fetus is the remodeling of the spiral arteriole, which gives adequate amount of nutrition and oxygen to the baby and adequate amount of flow to the baby. And this essential aspect of spiral artery remodeling takes place in 2 phases. In the first is the primary trophoblastic invasion, and the secondary trophoblastic invasion will take place about 16 to 18 weeks. Now let's look at what happens here. Let us consider there are 2 types of placenta. One is called as the type A placenta, where we call this as an extrinsic problem, where there's a poor placentation and there's an unremodeled spiral arteries which are there. And this leads to oxidatively stressed placenta. And this again leads to the stage 1 preeclampsia, where there is a syncytial trophoblast stress which is induced, and that causes poor nutrition to the baby. Now, maternal factors may affect the stage 1 preeclampsia, we call it as, and you also have another type where the placentation itself is normal, but then the placenta develops an intrinsic problem, and this intrinsic problem, which you call as a type B placenta, where there's placental malperfusion, placental hypoxia, and that again leads to stage 1 preeclampsia. And then we go on to stage 2 preeclampsia, where there's generalized excessive vascular inflammation, maternal clinical signs like hypertension and proteinuria are there. So we have early onset preeclampsia and late onset preeclampsia, but you can see there are 2 distinct phenotypes here which have been recognized. So in one, you're going to have a lot of maternal component which is there, and in another we see a lot of fetal component which is also there. So if you look at the onset, we have early onset and late onset preeclampsia. Early onset is less than 32 weeks. Preterm preeclampsia is less than 37, and term preeclampsia is 37 weeks and after. Now, in this, we have fetal growth restriction. There is significant perinatal mortality and morbidity. Then in late preeclampsia, there's also more placental pathology. There's more uterine and umbilical artery abnormalities, better diagnosed by angiogenic markers. All these are in early onset preeclampsia. There's a higher recurrence risk, higher maternal mortality and morbidity, higher remote cardiovascular disease, renal and retinal disease for the mother. So if you look at preeclampsia as such, a lot more implications, both maternal implications, long-term implications. It's not just a fetal problem we're looking at. So now the question comes is, whom are we going to screen and how are we going to identify people who are at risk for preeclampsia? Almost every association has issued guidelines, and the ACOG guidelines said we can do risk factor-based screening. For example, if there's a previous preeclampsia in the previous pregnancy, chronic hypertension, SLE, thrombophilia, nulliparity, age over 40 years, BMI, family history, and also conception by IVF. These are the ACOG guidelines. Then you also have the NICE and USPDF guidelines where they said about how to choose women to give low dose aspirin with these high risk factors. And they can have high risk factors and moderate risk factors. And each of these are listed. You can see more or less, you can see similar kind of risk factors which have been listed by both societies. But one of them is called as high risk and moderate risk. One of them is given the entire risk factors. Of course, the predictive ability for risk factors alone is only about 36% for a 5% false positive rate. So the detection rate will be only 36% if you go by risk factor-based screening alone. Now, the Fetal Medicine Foundation came up with a different kind of an algorithm that we should take maternal demographic factors, including ethnicity. Then they also said uterine artery pulsatility index, which could be considered, mean arterial pressure, and biochemical screening, which includes PAPE and also PLGF. So the screening, the components of the screening completely changed with the FMF algorithm, which used several multi-factors. And we had among this is the biophysical parameters, and we have biochemical parameters. The biophysical parameter is the mean arterial pressure, and mean arterial pressure is not just asking a staff nurse to take a routine blood pressure measurement with our mercury-based apparatus. It has a lot of conditions which they apply, where the person should not have taken no smoking, should not have had coffee before doing the measurement, should not have had exercise at least 30 minutes before. Then you need to take blood pressure on both arms, take 2 readings simultaneously, use properly calibrated and validated digital apparatuses, and also they need to sit still in a chair with the feet firmly on the ground. You can't have your legs hanging up in the air and you can't do the blood pressure. And so the parameters are very strict for taking the blood pressure, and we need to do at least in both the arms, take 2 readings 1 minute apart. And if you do all that and use an automated BP apparatus, and they said the accuracy of mean arterial pressure in preeclampsia, you have a positive predictive likelihood ratio of about 3.5, and of the systolic blood pressure, diastolic pressure, the mean arterial pressure turned out to be the most sensitive of all. Now, combining the use of demographic and biophysical parameters is a good thing to do, because each one of these parameters are not sensitive enough. So let's combine everything. And when you take history alone, you have for early onset preeclampsia, the sensitivity is about 47% and late is 35%. And if you use history plus mean arterial pressure and uterine artery PI, you get an 87.5% sensitivity for early onset preeclampsia. So there's a dramatic change from history alone to using both biophysical and biophysical parameters like uterine artery PI and mean arterial pressure. So, but again, you need to ensure that doing the uterine artery Doppler is done in an absolutely protocol-based manner. So you usually done transabdominally, where you place your probe just above the pubic symphysis, move your probe to the right side, after identify the uterine artery, get a good angle, and at the same time have your sample volume to 2 millimeters, and ensure that you get a good waveform which is tracked. And the same thing you repeat on the right side and left side, and before you can do that. You can see, just wanted to show you that how much of care that needs to be taken in doing the uterine artery Doppler. All the parameters, both the color Doppler parameters and the PW parameters, needs to be done correctly before you can interpret that waveform. So doing this in a hurry is really not going to help, because finally when you get the PI, you realize by doing the transabdominal and the transvaginal method, the PI differences will be there. So you interpret based on the method which you use and the chart which is used based on that. So uterine Doppler is an important component, but make sure it is done well. Now let's look at uterine Doppler and adverse pregnancy outcome. This meta-analysis paper showed that the risk of early onset preeclampsia with abnormal uterine Doppler in a when there's a low risk mother, it's about 2.4 to 5.8%. Whereas one high risk factor in any of these listed here is about 1.5 to 4%. And of course, the number needed to treat was about 251. So the sensitivity is for early onset is 47.8%. For late onset is only 21%. But the specificity is much higher at 90+%. So uterine Doppler alone in the first trimester is not going to be a value. That's why we need to combine the markers. So the 95th centile for mean uterine PI for transabdominal is 2.35, and for transvaginal is about 3.1. You can see there's a big variation in the cutoff which we use. And uterine resistance is higher on transvaginal compared to transabdominal measurement. And screening by first trimester, as we said, detects for a 10% false positive rate, you get a 48% detection rate for early onset preeclampsia. Now, we also need to understand longitudinal changes in Doppler indices. 73% of increased PI at first trimester normalized in the second trimester, and increased PI in the first and second trimester has a higher risk of adverse outcome. Now, normal PI at the first trimester had the lowest risk of adverse outcome. So if you do first trimester uterine Doppler and that shows normal PI, this person has got certainly a lesser chance of an adverse outcome as compared to those which has increased PI and in the first and second trimester, which has got the highest adverse outcome. So increased uterine resistance persisting from first trimester to second trimester may identify a woman at the highest risk of preeclampsia. But avoid waiting to start preventive methods till the second trimester, as it is rendered ineffective. Now let's go on to biochemical parameters, which is PLGF, PAPE, and SFLT1. Now we know that in a normal pregnancy, we have the PLGF and the vascular endothelial growth factor are important for maintenance of endothelial function. And at this point of time, the SFLT levels are low. But in preeclampsia, there's a higher level of SFLT, and this causes insufficient VEGF signaling and reduction of the vascular endothelial growth factor, and this causes endothelial dysfunction. So in PLGF, what happens? In normal pregnancy, there's a balance between PLGF and SFLT1, whereas in preeclampsia, the SFLT1 becomes high and the PLGF becomes low. Then PAPE is produced in the syncytial trophoblast. Patients with high risk for preeclampsia have a low PAPE, but only 8 to 20% of affected cases have low serum levels. It is poor as an independent screening tool, but can be added to other parameters as mentioned. So the Fetal Medicine Foundation assessment for risk of preeclampsia says you do the history and examination by maternal demographic factors, do the mean arterial pressure, do the ultrasound with uterine artery PI, and also do PAPE and PLGF. And if you want to look at the angiogenic factors, if you look at the risk of preeclampsia with SFLT1, we don't do it routinely now, but this is something which may be coming in, to be made available very soon. So here, if you see that that the levels of mean SFLT1 concentration starts rising, and when it starts rising, you can see that as the concentration is high, the weeks before preeclampsia is reducing. So if the value is here at this point of time, value is here, it's 9 to 11 weeks before onset of preeclampsia. But as the SFLT value rises, the number of weeks to preeclampsia is reducing. So the higher the value, the shorter the duration where the patient will get preeclampsia. So the next is, of course, the prognosis study, which showed about the SFLT1 to PLGF ratio. So what they said is, instead of taking SFLT1 alone, do a ratio of SFLT1 and PLGF. And they said if you have a cutoff point for SFLT1 PLGF ratio, has a very high negative predictive value, and with a sensitivity of about 88% or so. So the resultant says, out of 550 women, the SFLT1 to PLGF ratio less than 38 ruled out the onset of preeclampsia 2 and 3 weeks post baseline with a high negative predictive value of almost 98%. The onset of preeclampsia within 4 weeks was ruled out with a high negative predictive value and high sensitivity and specificity also. Now, compared with women who did not develop preeclampsia, those who developed preeclampsia had a significantly larger median increases in SFLT1 PLGF ratio at 2 weeks. So this shows that using an SFLT1 PLGF ratio might be of value and which has a high negative predictive value also. Now let's go on to the ASPIRATE trial, where the performance of screening for preterm preeclampsia at the ASPIRATE trial was, which showed that, which compared the FMF based screening and the NICE based screening, showed that preeclampsia, the FMF based screening, the sensitivity was both at 75%, the detection rate was 75%, whereas with NICE based guideline it was only 39% for preeclampsia less than 37 weeks. The false positive rates being both the same. And for preterm preeclampsia less than 32 weeks, the FMF-based guidelines gave you a much higher detection rate as compared to that. So now there were several trials that became, and then in 2018, Tan et al. Brought out a combination of 3 prior trials with about 61,000 cases with 1,770 preeclampsia cases. They finally said overall detection rate for early preeclampsia can come to 90%, with 75% for preterm. So in women who are screened positive by ACOG or NICE criteria, so the women were already screened positive by ACOG or NICE criteria. If you use FMF positive, screen positive by FMF criteria, the incidence of preterm preeclampsia increased substantially. But if they were FMF negative, the incidence was reduced to within or below the background levels. So they said the FMF criteria added to the ACOG or NICE criteria gave you a fairly good rate. And universal screening is better than selective screening. So they said that instead of selectively screening patients, you universally screen, and once you add the FMF criteria, you get a fairly good detection rate. So here is a typical method of what happens when you send it to the lab. We do screening for Down syndrome with your NT, NB, PLGF, and also PAPA. You add the uterine artery PI and the mean arterial pressure, and the result comes out like this. So by here's a condition where by age, the screening with preterm preeclampsia is 1 in 20, and the final risk is 1:98. The cutoff is 1:100. So the interpretation is increased risk, as you see here. So this patient, by history itself, by age itself, she was at high risk for her a priori risk itself was high. So this would call typically a screen positive patient for preeclampsia. Now you also have online methodologies where once you get all your data, you can put it on the Barcelona site where you answer all these questions and also the biometric data. The first trimester data, CRL, PAPE, systolic, diastolic BP, and also the uterine artery Doppler, and which you calculate the risk, it says 1 is 458. And similarly, you can put your the first trimester data, and then you can calculate the risk for early onset preeclampsia. Almost all of them prefer to, the prediction for early onset preeclampsia is better than late onset preeclampsia. Similarly, the Fetal Medicine Foundation also has the risk base. Slightly, the parameters are slightly different than what you see in the Barcelona site. But again, it will give you the risk as a preeclampsia risk from history only is 1 in 47. From history plus MAP plus uterine artery PI is 1 in 22. And then you can add your biochemistry. And so if you want to use the biochemical measurement, you can use the biochemical measurements to get your answers. So now the question is, the patient has been screened. It is no doubt that you screen with uterine artery Doppler, history, uterine artery Doppler, PAPE, and PLGF. It's a screening method of choice at this point of time. So the low dose, the aspirin trial result shows that low dose aspirin can decrease significantly the risk for development of early PE when administration commences at the first trimester screening. So the aspirin trial found that the reduced risk for preeclampsia reduced the risk before 37 weeks by 62%, before 34 weeks by 82%, and the benefits equal to compliance of greater than 90% by starting aspirin early. So aspirin initiated at less than 16 weeks, higher dosages of aspirin, and low dose aspirin initiated at greater than 16 weeks. So this is the systematic review which said that if aspirin is initiated less than 16 weeks, significant reduction in dose response effect for prevention of preeclampsia, severe PE or FGR. At higher dosage of aspirin associated with greater reduction of the three outcomes, that is 100 to 150 milligrams. Low dose aspirin initiated after 16 weeks, modest or no impact on the risk of preeclampsia, severe preeclampsia, and fetal growth restriction. So this clearly says that whatever screening you do must be done early in the first trimester. So the prevention for small for gestational age, there is according to the aspirin, there's a 70% decrease in SGA born less than 37 weeks. And when you do the PE screen, 40% decrease. So if you go according to almost all of them have a significant decrease. The aspirin trial gives you probably the best result in terms of decrease in the SGA born beyond less than 37 weeks. So one last word about screening in multiple pregnancies. Rate of preeclampsia is 3 times more in twins, and in dichorionic twins is about 8%, whereas in monochorionic twins is about 6%. The relative risk of early preeclampsia is 9 times more in twins. So it makes a lot of sense for us to have some program for twins. Now, the competing risk model for preeclampsia risk in twins, with a risk cutoff at 1 in 10, the detection rate for early preeclampsia less than 32 weeks is 71%, but screen positive rate is over 50%. Almost like 1 in 2 women which you screen will turn out to be positive. If you have a risk cutoff of 1 in 75, the detection rate of early preeclampsia is less than 32 weeks, will be 100%, but screen positive rate is also nearly 100%. That actually means screening for preeclampsia using uterine artery Doppler has no role in twins. Multimodality screening for preeclampsia, it's not done because of a higher a priori risk itself. So a word about glycosylated fibronectin levels in mild and severe preeclampsia. Now here the levels of glycosylated fibronectin in controls, severe preeclampsia, and at 20 to 30 weeks of gestation, and 30 to 40 weeks, and 5 to 15 weeks. Obviously, there's not much of value at 5 to 15 weeks, but when you go to the second trimester, it probably has value. So high levels of glycosylated fibronectin are associated with HELLP syndrome and small for gestational age infants, which has been shown. So this is a sort of a bedside test. It's a point of care test assessment of preeclampsia status, where you do a finger stick sample, accuracy to detect women with or without symptoms of preeclampsia. It resolves ambiguous issues of blood pressure, urine protein estimation, and clinical risk symptoms and the risk of preeclampsia. So this test, the range is 5 to 250 microgram. Test result is normal. It gives you a high negative predictive value. If it's 251 to 350, mild or a developing PE, repeat test in 2 weeks' time. At 351 to 600, test result is called positive. You can give a preeclampsia diagnosis. Greater than 600, high positive, severe preeclampsia and potential preterm birth. But the issue is it is a bit expensive at this point of time, but maybe in the future to be able to do it. So I'll finish with a few question and answers. If a woman is already on aspirin, will it impact the screening? Screening should be done because dose would be 75 milligrams. Generally, people have low dose aspirin, 75 milligrams, and that is suboptimal. Screening will determine if she needs 150 milligrams. Is there a risk of vaginal spotting? The Aspirate trial said no. There is no risk for vaginal spotting because of aspirin. Is the dosage of aspirin weight dependent? 150 milligram is the standard dose, but if a woman is less than 40 kilograms, 100 milligrams of aspirin would do. Can we simply give aspirin to all? The answer is no. Screen positive phenotype will respond to aspirin. Whether screen negative cohort will respond is a question which still needs to be answered. For 10,000 women, if aspirin is given, 33 cases will be prevented. More than 9,000 will take the drug unnecessarily. So that's why it's not, you cannot give aspirin for all. When there's a prior history of preterm preeclampsia, but now screen negative, do we start aspirin? Ideally, no, as biomarkers have reduced screen risk. But finally, it's a clinical decision. If presentation is at 14 weeks, cannot do combined screening, use NICE guidelines, and if high risk, 150 milligram a day aspirin. So if the patient comes late, then what do we do? That's what this means, that you can't do the combined screening. So go by NICE guidelines, and if high risk, do that. So what is the number needed to screen? 10,000 is screened. If 10,000 is screened, preeclampsia cases will be 70. Aspirate detects 53 of them. Prophylaxis prevents 33 of them. And number needed to screen to prevent one case is 303. So you need to screen 303 women to detect one case of preeclampsia. Now, a last word about the problem of late preeclampsia. It's 3 to 6 times more common. Routine screening does not work because the sensitivity is low, and the method to rescreen between 35 and 36 weeks and introduce treatment need to be evolved. So at present, we don't have too much to late preeclampsia or term preeclampsia. But of course, we have gestational age on our side. Thank you very much for a patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir, for that extensive talk. We have few questions from the audience. Sir, first is, how early can we screen the women with previous history of preeclampsia?
No, if they come early, I think first trimester screening 11 to 13 weeks. Screening for preeclampsia is 11 to 13 weeks, irrespective of whether they had previous. What I said was, if there's a previous history and she has missed out on the early screening, then you can simply start off the aspirin from 14 weeks onwards because you have missed the screening window. You don't need to go to screening at that point in time.
Sir, the next question is, as per FIGO 2018 guidelines, in a low resource setting, demography and mean arterial pressure is enough for screening. What is your take on it, sir?
Correct. So, see, when you go for screening, even whether you take Down syndrome screening or whether you take preeclampsia screening, there are several components of the screening. Now, by adding more and more components, what you are trying to do is to increase your detection rate and reduce your false positive rate. So in a low resource setting, if you don't have access to the biochemistry or whatever it is, you are able to screen with the history and also the uterine artery Doppler, let us say. It's still good enough, but you will have a higher false positive rate, but it's good enough. You can certainly do it. So as long as you know that the number needed to treat will be much higher by using a lesser number of components. As I showed you earlier, with only history alone, it's a 36% detection rate. And 36% that means then you have to get a huge number of women into this fold where you and what you'll do is some potentially low risk women by history who would otherwise have a problem as a primary in the first trimester in that pregnancy will get missed if you go by history alone. So you add your uterine artery Doppler, you will pick up some of those, even though they are primary with no previous history, you will pick up some of those. You add biochemistry, you will pick up more of them. So that's why there's absolutely no problem of what you can afford, what you can happen at that time, use it.
So should 60 centimeter per second, should that always be used as a criteria for cutoff to identify a uterine artery?
Yes, when you do the uterine artery Doppler, if the velocity is not more than 60 centimeters, if it is less than 60 centimeters per second, that is not considered as proper sampling, or maybe you're not sampling the uterine artery itself, so you should not use it. That's a very fundamental criteria.
You would, by mistake, be sampling the arcuate or any other way.
It could be arcuate artery, maybe too far close.
Sir, is there any role of high dose of calcium to reduce preeclampsia?
Well, I think I will ask Sineesh to answer that question, because I don't treat patients. Or Jyoti is there. A lot of experts are
here. Calcium does have a role in people with low resource. If they are deficient in calcium and vitamin D, there is a role for supplementation. For properly, if the nutrition is normal, as of now, we don't have any multicentric randomized trial to support the use of high dose calcium for prevention of preeclampsia alone.
Unmute, please.
Next is role of heparin. Is there any role of...
I think, Rinshi, I will be covering those things in my lecture. So we will reserve it for...
okay, then one more question. Okay. Uterine PI cutoff to consider high risk for twins or triplets does it remain the same?
No, we said no. In twins, there is no role for preeclampsia. It doesn't work well at all. So we don't use any cutoffs. Because twins by themselves are a high risk already. By themselves, twins are high risk for. So screening doesn't work.
So there's a question from Piley, sir. For the South Indian population, what is your recommendation?
For the South Indian population? Sir, I think if a screening program can be established, see, because our practice is so varied and very heterogeneous practice is what goes on everywhere. There are some, because nearly 50% of care is private care and 50% is the public care. Now 50 or 60% even is public care. Now in the public hospitals, not all of them have access or established screening program for preeclampsia yet. At least I know that in Chennai, there is really no screening program for preeclampsia happen. So what do we do then? What do we do there is the volumes of patients are so in a hospital with 18 or 20,000 deliveries, you have a 400, 200 to 300 outpatients a day, and you need an army of people sitting down and doing this. So it's a serious issue. Now, what we can do at least is go by the history. So you can do one filter, which is the history filter, if you are not able to even access uterine artery Doppler. For those who have access to uterine artery Doppler, certainly I think that should be done. And many of these women who attend government hospitals do not come in the first trimester. They may come in the second or third trimester. So by the time it's already too late. So population level screening requires, I don't know whether it can really be achieved in our this one. Completely opposite is where in the private sector where they have access to everything and the entire thing is done. So the recommendation means there is an ideal method to do. There are people who can afford to go and do it. And there are people who don't have access to that kind of a level. So you have to balance yourself to what is available and make the best use of what is available. I don't know whether I got it right and what Professor Paily's expectation was. But I've been very troubled by this because when I see a woman, when I know that I can provide this good information with all this, and I see a woman who does not have access to this, and I say, what this is not equitable care, and we feel very helpless about it.
Paily sir, your comment, sir.
Thank you, Vinayathan. If I may just ask Suresh, my concern is one other aspect as well. The number of patients who end up with serious problem, eclampsia, and even maternal death are mainly not from the, if you take at the numbers, not from the early onset, but from the late onset. And your pickup for the late onset is poor from what all these things. So how justified is it for us to start asking for expensive investigations and all that? Is it still just, is it even now justified is my worry.
True, sir. Very true. I fully agree with you. The is, if you look at it from a completely different perspective, by asking, we can say by asking a few questions, I already know this set of women are going to have problems early. And because in early, as they are coming to me for follow-up, and every visit I'm going to do that blood pressure, I'm going to find them out anyway. But only thing is, there is some modification. In late, we are definitely stuck, as you say. We don't have the magic bullet as we say, and I think some point in the near future, the magic bullet. And now they are saying now concentrate on the maternal heart rather than more than this. You have to do a echo as a mother. It's the maternal heart which is going to be the problem. So concentrate on the mother rather than anything. That's what the trend is going towards. That.
If I may be allowed to add one more point, Suresh, that I wouldn't like to leave it on a desperate note like that. What I would suggest is, even in big cities like Chennai or some centers in Kerala, where if we can show that screening with Doppler as well as biochemical means can make a big difference, then only even the government will start thinking about implementing that for the general population. So it is still worth doing it, though where we can afford it. I still agree with going by that. But when we generalize it, at the moment, I think it may not give returns to us the way we want. That's all my point.
Yes, sir. Because it requires enormous amount of effort and infrastructure and manpower, sir. Because honestly, I feel doing these kind of routine screening we should train one level of people who will do, and these need not be highly qualified doctors wasting their time. And that is something which our country is not even looking at it. I don't need an MD qualified person sitting and doing a uterine artery Doppler on every single woman. We need people at a basic level who can sit and do this day and out, and that will yield enormous amount of dividends. Unfortunately, that is not something we are moving towards. We are actually moving towards a very different direction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Piley sir, for your inputs. So the next question is there a third trimester screening to be offered for late onset preeclampsia?
At present, we don't do screening. With this, the prediction of the first trimester screening with the sensitivity for late onset is what we offer. We don't do a separate screening in the third trimester. It's all done in the first trimester.
Is first trimester quad test a next first line screening?
Quad test for next?
Quad test,
yeah.
For preeclampsia.
So quad test is see in the component of the quad, it's only PAPA and PLGF, isn't it? Before preeclampsia, it's only PAPA and PLGF. The other components are not for preeclampsia. So the quad test is more for Down syndrome. Depends on what you're calling as quad, right? If you're including uterine artery Doppler as part of your quad, that's a different thing. But when you say quadruple, means quadruple biochemical markers. In this quadruple biochemical, only 2 of them are meant for preeclampsia.
So there's another question on your views on Congo red eye test as screening test.
Sorry, I have absolutely no idea about it.
Ophthalmic artery screen in first trimester will help.
Yes, that is okay. I didn't include this because it has not come into routine practice as yet. But certainly there is something which we have done for some cases. It may have some idea, but my thing is do an ophthalmic artery Doppler. It's not difficult, but you're going to put the probe on ask the woman to close her eye and put it there. I think many women will be very worried about it, putting a probe in the eye. But it is certainly of value, but whether it will give more than your current uterine artery Doppler, or it will be easier to do than a uterine artery Doppler, in practical, we have to look at it. But that's something it's worth exploring at this point of time.
So there are many more questions coming up, but we'll go ahead with the next session. Or do we continue?
We have a last 30 minutes between 8:30 to 9 just for the question and answer sessions, because this is a hot topic and a lot of questions are coming. Yeah. So that session is entirely for this.
You can go ahead with the introducing the next speaker and next session. And